everybody. Welcome to the number one comics podcast. This is the podcast that is dedicated only to first issues. I'm your host, Jonah, and with me is Bill.
How's it going?
Bill, how are you today?
Not too good. Can we edit that out?
No, we're not cutting it out. We're leaving that all in.
Fuck you. We are too. I'm just kidding.
Friends. Go another take. Go for it.
We'll start again.
I'm doing great today, Jonah. As you can see, I've switched to the long sleeve version of my hoodie.
Excellent. Nice.
Yeah.
I have now switched to the long sleeve version of my quarter zip. Perfect. Well, today we are talking about Astonishing X-Men #1. This was published by Marvel Comics back in May of 2004, had a cover price on it of $2.99, written by Joss Whedon of Firefly, Avengers movie fame, etc. And the artist was John Cassaday. Rest in peace. He just recently passed away, sadly. This is a self-contained story insulated from crossovers, as we were kind of talking about beforehand, as well as other large-scale events such as House of M, Civil War, and more. So Joss didn't care for those big crossover events, and he was
right.
And I agree. I don't care for him either. But he was essentially given the ability to do this on his own, in his own little pocket, so to speak, and not have to worry about that. It is sort of a continuation of Grant Morrison's new X-Men title. Did you read any of the new X-Men?
I wasn't a huge fan of the new X-Men. I kind of caught bits and pieces of it here and there.
Morrison is he's polarizing for me because there's some things I really like that he does and things I really don't like that he does.
And I'm a sucker for the 90s X-Men, Jim Lee runs, all that stuff. So when they throw a huge wrench into it and totally change it from the way I remember X-Men or the way I'm fond of X-Men, I'm kind of like,
Yeah. And whenever they introduce a lot of new characters that or maybe existing characters that I'm not super familiar with. I'm actually going through this right now with the current X-Men titles. So I'd gotten X-Men over the last couple of years. So the House of X, Rise of X, Fall of X, X of Swords, all these different iterations of over the last couple of years. What they're calling the Krakoan era. I didn't really read any of it though. I was just buying it and then putting it in a box, and I haven't actually gone back and read it. Well, they just recently relaunched, Uncanny X-Men with a new #1, X-Men with a new #1. I'm sure we'll talk about those at some point.
right.
And I have gone and started reading those. And it's okay. But it's one of those things where there's characters in here where it's man, should I know this person? Because I don't. And that was one of the cool things about this, as we'll talk about, is these are characters that we grew up with.
Right.
And that we know for better or for worse. Right. I'd never picked up this series. Well, let me rephrase that. I didn't pick up this series until probably the third story arc. So it might have been issue 13 or 14 when I started picking this up. I got the first two story arcs in trade. And again, it's one of those that, like we've talked about before, it is written for that trade paperback format. So it is relatively decompressed. Right. It's not as jam-packed full of content as, a lot of other titles that we will be looking at were. There was 2 limited series with Astonishing in the title, I think even before this.
Yeah.
One goes back to 95, which was part of the Age of Apocalypse storyline, which I was a huge fan of.
Oh, yeah.
At the time. And then there was one in 99 as well, which ran for about 3 issues. So let's go ahead and do a real quick synopsis. Spoilers ahead. So if you haven't read this and you want to, and you don't want any spoilers, fast forward. We open here with a nightmare. There's a young girl named Tildy. She's thrust awake, and she calls out for her caretaker, which is Dr. Kavita Rao. Dr. Kavita Rao rushes in to comfort her as a mysterious figure observes from behind glass. And then we cut to the title page, which is called Gifted. We then meet up with Kitty Pryde. She's arriving at a recently rebuilt Xavier mansion. She's visited by memories of the past The mansion appears empty until she pushes through a wall and onto the center stage of an assembly of brand new students led by Emma Frost, Cyclops, and Beast. Emma reveals that to the audience that Kitty will serve as a teacher and student advisor. Emma and Scott, that's Cyclops, if you guys don't know who Scott is, that's Cyclops, will serve as co-headmasters in lieu of Professor X's sabbatical, quote-unquote sabbatical. Kitty, Logan, and Beast, they're going to round out the senior staff. Using a Danger Room quality hologram of Sentinels bursting through the roof, Emma teaches the first lesson to the students, which is, they will always hate us. She reiterates that control and nonviolence are essential. Their lesson even catches Scott by surprise, as he and Emma discuss later in their quarters. The following morning, Scott awakens to Logan perched on the edge of the bed, which that's such a great scene.
It is.
Such a great scene. Perched on the edge of the bed, he very much like my cat does.
Right.
After a brief exchange of Logan judging Scott's relationship with Emma, he's blasted right out of the side of the manor by Cyclops' powerful optic blast. Logan and Cyclops are about to tear into one another with the students and fellow staff and Emma, who at this point is feeling like a runner-up to Jean Grey. They're all looking on. We then cut to a holographic representation that the Danger Room's providing of essentially the Hawaiian Islands. So Beast transported him to the Hawaiian Islands for a meeting. This is where Scott reveals that they're a team, and it seems that this was an alternative agenda that he and Emma may have had even before putting this school back together and putting these people into place. And each member is going to be playing a part of this team, which, much to Kitty's chagrin, she's like a likable non-aggressor of the team. And so I don't think she's really too keen on that aspect of it. She's also a good counter to Emma's ex-villainness, right? And Beast's beastly appearance and Logan's thuggish appearance. So she's kind of the nice person on the team, the poster child, so to speak.
Right.
Now, of course, you can't have a superhero team without costumes, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment because I love the costumes in this. The next few scenes cut between Dr. Rao about to give a press conference, Logan and Kitty, and then an apparent hostage situation, which gives Scott their opportunity to debut the new team. The lead hostage taker is revealed to be an alien. We'll learn his name. It's Ord is what we learn his name to be. In Dr. Rao's press conference, she makes the bold claim that mutants are nothing more than people with the disease. We cut to a splash page with our beautifully suited up astonishing X-Men heading towards the Blackbird. Now we end the issue with the team heading off to rescue the hostages and Dr. Rao stating that while the mutant gene is nothing more than a disease, they now have a cure. To be continued. Right? What are your thoughts on this book, on the story?
Kind of the age-old question like they posed in the second X-Men movie, or no, it was the third one, my bad. Kind of the age-old question they posed in like X-Men The Last Stand is like, we have an opportunity to make these people normal so they don't have to be feared anymore. Is it really a disease? Do we really need to be cured?
Yeah.
There's nothing. Is there anything wrong with us? And I can see certain people that would be like, like Rogue or like Beast.
Yep.
Or people that don't have like the normal, quote, normal appearance would jump at this, but the girl in this, like, my God, her powers must be just exhausting.
Yeah.
Because her nightmares sort of become real.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. And she kind of manifests it in like a monstrous form.
Right.
Essentially. Yep.
So I can see as like a child being like, I don't want people to look at me with fear the rest of my life.
Yeah.
You know.
Some of my thoughts on this story, on this first issue, if there's anybody who comes to me and they want to read, they're like, oh, I want to read this, or I'm a big fan of Wolverine and I want to read this, but I don't know where to start. This is usually where I direct them to, because of how continuity free it is.
I do appreciate that aspect.
Yeah. So if you don't know, some of the characters, this, maybe it's your first iteration of Beast, or it's your first iteration of, Kitty Pryde or Wolverine. And so you're not really given a lot of insight into their personalities necessarily, but it's still, and I think you'll get more of that as it goes on. But it's such an easy read. Versus someone now trying to pick up X-Men #1 and trying to figure out who's who and what's going on and why they are where they are. And plus, it's gorgeously cinematic. The artwork is. Oh yeah. It is like absolutely looking at a movie on the page. And so this, in my opinion, while it's not perfect, this does accomplish everything that a first issue should.
Yeah.
It sets up the core cast of heroes. It introduces us to a threat, and it even plants seeds for additional plots and subplots going forward.
Right.
And so I think it's almost perfect from that standpoint. X-Men continuity, as we've talked about, it's been muddled. It's been convoluted for a long time. Even at this point, you had the new X-Men, you had House of M, so it was really changing. The mutant landscape was looking a lot different.
Yeah.
At that point in time, and it might be hard for someone to just pick up House of M as their first, go about with an X-Men book or a new X-Men title, because again, I love and hate that title at the same time, but it is so strange in some parts. It's going to lose a non-comic book reader, but this I could give to somebody who doesn't read comics, and they would be able to read this without any problems.
Oh, I certainly agree.
Yeah.
Well, and not only that, but kind of like we talked about last week with Spider-Man, where, we'd kind of been that kind of got me out of comics for a while. If I picked this up after reading the X-Men comics in the 90s, I'm instantly going to recognize the core team members. I'm instantly going to be like, okay, Professor X is in there. Scott and Emma are taking over. Cool. Let's go from there.
Yeah,
we're fine. There's not a whole lot of, backstory that I need beyond that.
Yeah, it doesn't get bogged down in backstory, and it presents a lot of questions that, a reader could take it upon themselves to go and find out, or maybe just stick with it to see what they find out, what happened to Professor X, what happened to Scott's previous wife, Jean,
what it really reminded me of, I don't know if you ever watched the Wolverine and the X-Men
the cartoon
series.
I have not.
It reminded me a lot of that, because it's kind of like set in that same kind of tone where Professor X is in there, Emma's taking the place, taking the place of Jean, for lack of a better term. Cyclops is just kind of there and okay, we need to get the team back together kind of thing.
What are your thoughts on Cyclops?
I have always loved Cyclops as a leader. I've always preferred, I'm so glad the costumes in this, like you were saying, he got that full head covering thing. I always preferred that look to the classic kind of half mask thing he has in the 90s.
Yeah, with his little tufts of hair sticking out. Yeah.
I always thought that looked ridiculous, but I do like this. I think he looks a lot more tactical with it.
Yeah, the costumes are sweet. His in particular, very stealthy, very tactical. Not a lot of we're post 90s, so not a lot of pouches.
Right.
Which
exactly.
I don't know what he kept in those little pouches anyway.
I don't know.
Fingernail
Cable
clippers.
Certainly had plenty of them.
Yeah.
Jesus. No, there was a certain point though, and I don't know if it was around this same period of time in the comic books, that to me Cyclops just became insufferable. And I kind of was like, okay, I know there was that whole thing with Jean Grey dying and whatever else, and it's...
Well, I mean, at some point, didn't he become there was the whole, and I don't remember where it happened in comparison with this story, but there was the whole, the 13 or he was one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse or something along those lines.
Yeah,
he's been put through the ringer numerous times over the years.
So I could understand why.
And he's always kind of been a dick, which is why I've always liked him.
Right.
And the Cyclops that really resonates with me that I always think about is the one from the animated series.
Oh yeah.
And whenever I read even this Cyclops, I'm reading it in that.
I'm hearing
that
voice
kind of stern
X-Men 97 or the 90s X-Men. Yeah.
Yep, that's the voice that I hear it in. So yeah, like I said, the costumes they look dope. I really like the intercut scenes in the last few pages, how they just cut these scenes together like again, it's very cinematic that way. And I think that it does a really good job of building up the suspense for what's to come in the next issue.
Right.
So I thought that was really clever use of laying out the story, and that wasn't really something that I'd seen in comics a lot up to that point. And usually when I had seen it in comic books, it wasn't so clearly defined that it kind of lost me sometimes, where I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. Oh, now I don't know what's happening here. But this was, again, such an easy read for anybody to just pick up.
Definitely.
Overall, I think, like I said, this is a classic example of, mid 2000s first issue. It serves as a great jumping on point for new readers. I think it does, having only read it in trade and not having ever read it in singles, I think it reads better. To me, I think it probably would read better in trade than it would have as a single issue. That's just my own take.
Yeah.
As far as, kind of what came next with this series, it ran for 68 issues. So it ran for a good while. It saw a number of creative teams, including Warren Ellis. He jumped on, I think, with issue 25. Daniel Way and Christos Gage, beginning with issue 36. Greg Pak, and then it finally ended with Marjorie Liu. Admittedly, I probably only read the Joss Whedon and the Ellis run. I don't know if I'd gotten into the Daniel Way and Christos Gage runs. I think I was probably getting out of comics by that time again.
Right.
And I don't know that I've ever gone back to pick those up or check them out. Like I said, I own a majority of those in singles, once you get past the first few trades. I never finished reading the whole series, though. I probably should go back and finish it up. This was replaced in November of 2013 by Amazing X-Men, which was penned by Jason Aaron. And that's another series that it ran for like 19 issues. And I haven't read that, but I'm sure I will because it's Jason Aaron and he's one of my all-time favorites. So I'm sure I'll be checking that out as well. But if anyone is looking for an introduction into an X-Men title and you don't want to get bogged down by continuity, I definitely recommend this one.
Absolutely.
So... All right. Well, that's all we got for this particular episode. Thanks for joining us. Again, we are the #1 Comics Podcast. You can find us on Facebook. Like and subscribe to this video. We've got an email address as well, which is #1comicspodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out. Appreciate it. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.
Later.